Hi guys, Stefan here with Chatbots Life in the Chatbot Conference. And today I'm interviewing my good friend Alex, who's the founder of Rasa, and which is one of the top NLP startups in the space. If you're looking for something that you can use inside of your company without having to go to one of the giants, Rasa is definitely the way to go, and it's open source. So without further ado, Alex, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and Rasa.
Sure, yeah. Hey everyone, good to meet you. I hope to see you at one of the events in real life at some point in time as well. And so yeah, as Stefan already said, I think you and I know each other for like a couple of years now.
Yeah.
Ever since the big chatbot craze started, and I've really enjoyed coming to the chatbot conferences so far. And pretty much like with Rasa started right when like Facebook opened up their API back in the days, and everyone thought that fast forward to today we'll only use chatbots, which hasn't happened yet. And I think that's probably also something we are covering today a little bit, why that hasn't happened. But quickly on me, Alex, my name, co-founder and CEO of Rasa. I co-founded the company together with Alan actually in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And back then we were trying to build a chatbot ourselves and realized that it's just really, really hard. And I think fast forward to today with our open source tooling for developers, I think we made it a lot easier, but by no means have like solved conversational AI. And that's also probably something interesting to talk about today, a little bit like where we are right now, where we see the industry, but also the challenges ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember when I got into bots in 2016, I thought it was easy to make a bot, but really hard to make a good bot.
I agree. Yeah, I think. I mean, I think we wouldn't have said it back then like that, but I think the way how we look at it now at Rasa is that it's easy to get to POC, to a proof of concept.
Right.
It's really hard to go from POC into production, and it's pretty much also because I think conversational AI lends itself to building really cool and amazing demos if you use them yourself. But once you ask like the person next to you to use your demo bot, they'll definitely break it, right? And it's not because they are mean people, it's because they just think differently, and they might, just have a different way of saying the same thing, which is where NLU starts, right? Natural language understanding. But maybe they have a totally different way of thinking about the problem. And so you pretty much want to be able to manage also dialogues in like a more dynamic way. And there's just like two challenges, but I think, yeah, it's hard, definitely.
Yeah. When you're working with companies, or when companies are using Rasa in order to go from that POC to production, what are some of their biggest challenges on that path to go from POC? And then is there anything they can do to make that process easier? Is there, obviously the technology has gotten better over the last 3-4 years substantially. But what about in terms of like the way they strategize or think about their project on the front end, or the team that they put together, and later on the way they handle errors within the bot and people not understanding, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it probably falls into like two major things that they have to change compared to the POC stage. And I think the first thing is really they have to unlearn how they build the POC.
Interesting.
And so what I mean with this is that it's just very different to, again, like build something real quick together, right? Which follows the logic that you as a developer or maybe business user had in mind. And so if you have it live in the wild with real users, they'll probably do something completely different with it. And so I think first of all, they have to entirely change the way how they think about it. But they also, as a second step, they really have to change how they actually build software, because a lot of companies out there have been used to building software over the last 10 years or 10, 15 years, in like this way of like shipping something, and then you have code and then you iterate on it, but that's it, right? But now you have like code and data, and you kind of need to pretty much improve your machine learning models over time, all the time. And that's really important, and that becomes super important. And I think a lot of companies don't really feel comfortable pushing something out that is not perfect. And that's understandable, because they are measured towards like high quality. But then if you think about it, Like if you think about your FAQ website,
Mhm.
a lot of people don't ask the question of like how many disappointed users leave your FAQ website, right? But everyone notices if like one conversation with a chatbot or AI assistant is messed up because they see it immediately, right? And I think that's also where just companies need to think about it a little differently to get to production and keep one there.
Yeah, definitely. The way one of the best examples I've heard is that like until now, most technology, whether it was an app or a website, was kind of like like a digital magazine. You go to the homepage or the menu, you see like what, page 39 has the FAQ questions. You flip to page 39, right? It's very static content. And
Yeah.
now we're in a dynamic content where the magazine's talking to you and asking you questions. And so
Hmm.
like you have an unlimited number of inputs that you could throw in there.
Yeah.
And obviously like my inputs are going to be different than yours and so on. Uh, is there like a threshold that companies try to get to so at the bare minimum they can get some or a lot preferably value out of the bot? So maybe like one of the things that we've seen is like if they're doing an FAQ bot starting with like the 10 most commonly asked questions, because you get those out of the way and now you have something that's really highly valuable from like an ROI standpoint, right? And so it's worth for the company to come in and start there. And then they realize that like their 11th FAQ, most frequently asked question, is just very, very complex. Maybe it's like, I'll give a good bad example. Like, let's say your FAQ is like installing a television,
Yeah.
right? Maybe like the first 10 steps are easy. You plug it in, like not too many people are going to get that wrong. But maybe the 11th step is like really, really difficult. Or the 11th most commonly asked question is like resetting your TV or something like that. Do you have any recommendations on how they can go from POC to production that's really highly valuable? And then how to address the problem of like my questions being different than yours?
Yeah, I mean, maybe let's take the like POC to production example first, because I think it's a little more complex than that in reality. But let's say you have this like 10 FAQs and it's one question, one answer, and then you go live in production, and then you see that people ask this like, and maybe it's a good example also with COVID-19 now, right? Maybe all of a sudden people ask just different questions, so this also changes the dynamic in the assistant. And so you want to be able to learn from those real questions and handle them in the future, because you are not able to anticipate all of them anyway. So you might as well just go and see what people actually ask. And I mean, that's what Alan and I did when we built our first chatbot. In fact, we didn't even build a chatbot. What we did is like we just pretended to be the bot. And so we had this like weird interface connecting to Slack, and then we were able to Slack message people, but it was pretending that we were a bot.
Mhm.
So with that, we learned what people actually ask. And I mean, that's a bit of an extreme way, and I know that it doesn't work for all teams to prototype like that. But my main point is like, as early as you can, like give it to real users, and then you'll see
Uh-huh.
what they ask. So that's, I think, step number one. But then step number two is really, I think that from that, most browser users and most bot developers and people in this space that I talk to find that it's not that people ask just one question
Mhm.
and expect an answer. It's very rarely like that, because mostly if you take the example of somebody being in a country far away and they lost their credit card, for example. So if you say something like, I lost my credit card to your banking bot, what you're actually saying is that you need a new credit card. So, but you say I lost my credit card, and so what you expect is kind of having a dialogue around, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. Should I don't know, cancel your existing credit card? Do you want a new one sent to which address? And so having this full dialogue is something that most users would expect at some point in time. And I think that's really where it becomes extremely tricky. And in fact, when we first started working on this, we didn't think about it like that, but we created these like 5 levels of AI assistance, how we call
Yeah.
it. And so similarly to like 5 levels of autonomous driving, where you also have like different pretty much advances over time. And
Right.
so the example that you gave, this like FAQ bot, is something that we would consider as like a level 2 assistant. And so it really is like one question, one answer, maybe a little bit of back and forth, but that's it. And then level 3, and that's something that we've been focusing on at Rasa over the last couple of years, is really what we call a contextual assistant. And it like keeps kind of context in consideration, but it also is first and foremost able to take decisions based on that context. So for example, if you would maybe already know that somebody is in Thailand, you wouldn't ask them again, like which country they are in, right? You probably say something like, oh, I noticed because you're logged into the app or so that you're in Thailand. Is that correct, right? Do you want your new credit card shipped to Thailand? I think all of those things are important, but then it's also about the context of the actual dialogue, right? So if I just said before that I was in Thailand, it's really weird to ask that again. And so that's where it becomes really, really, I think, tricky in a way that it's manageable, but you just need different tools. So you can't just have like your one click and drag tool that you maybe use for prototyping and POC.
I see. So it's kind of like you have to. One of the challenges is remembering contextually certain parameters from the user.
Yeah.
And then in your example, like I guess when a person has an intent, their intent might be a cluster of intents.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And that goes in this direction. My co-founder wrote about this, that we probably have to get rid of intents at some point in time. And that's, I mean, that comes from this idea also that not everything is always an intent. And so, I mean, the easiest example is if you think about like a form filling exercise, right? So let's take this example again of like, I lost my credit card. If I say Thailand,
Yeah.
it's really not really an intent. I mean, my intent is to answer the question because it was asked like, you know, which country do you want this credit card to be shipped to? But it's not really an intent. And I think a lot of the like terminology that we are using still comes from a level 2 world, right? Where people thought of this problem of conversational AI as a one question, one answer world. Because in that sense, it makes sense, right? If you only think of dialogues between humans as questions and answers, you really don't need more than intents and entities. I mean, maybe you have sentiment and like some other things, but those are like the main elements. If you think about like really this like continuous dialogue back and forth, you need to give things different names, right? It's a bit like if you think about the web, and if somebody like at some point in time, you know, people would talk about Web 2.0, logged in experiences, and people also came up with new concepts for that, right? And I think the switch from level 2 to level 3 that we are trying to push forward at Rasa is a similar one, right? You just can't use your Web 1.0 terminology anymore.
That's beautiful. So tell me, like, what does level 3 look like, and how can we get rid of intents, or how can we think about them in a new way, like a level 3 way?
Yeah. I mean, so level 3 in general, I think looks like the demos that people are building. It just actually works in production. And I think that's really the difference. And so I think like, so when we initially like worked on our bot, right? What we did is like, we tried to map out those dialogues in advance. And so what we did is like, we pretty much with a rule-based approach said, if in this context this happens, then do this, right? And if not, do this. And so you end up having a decision tree. And for like a POC, and so when I say POC, I also mean like smaller production projects or so, right? So like anything that is not full blown. And so if you have a small use case, you can do that. In fact, you can go and like come up with all the different permutations of how the conversation around the credit card could look like, right? Because maybe I say, I'm lost in, or like I'm stuck in Thailand and lost my credit card, right? But maybe I say I'm in Thailand, and that's it, right? Maybe I'm too like overwhelmed with my feelings at the moment that I don't say I lost my credit card, and then you have asked back like, what do you actually want, customer?
How can I help you?
And so back to your point, right? So it's, you have a dialogue is kind of consisting of all these different intents mapped together. And so when we say level 3, what we really mean is like this back and forth conversation, but in a way that you don't have to pre-program and create rules for all the different turns that can take. And so, for example, if you think about this like idea of ordering a new credit card, ideally the developer experience would be in a way that you say, well, in order to order a new credit card, I need these 5 parameters, right?
Yeah.
And then the user can give those in an arbitrary order.
Okay.
Without you as a developer or a product team thinking about all the different permutations. And so that's pretty much what we mean when we say contextual assistant. And it's one example of that.
Is that similar to like Amazon Lex's idea of slots? Or is that taking slots like to a new level?
It's a bit like that, but I mean, I think slots in like Amazon Lex, and I think it's or the Echo ecosystem in general, as well as like Dialogflow has a concept like that too. It's a bit different in a way that like for us, we really see that across like the whole like conversation, and I think a lot of those tools like make it very narrow for like one intent or so.
I see. So a lot of these tools are associating those slots to specific intents.
Exactly, yeah. Because, and it's because they've been built for this intent first model, right?
Right.
And so and I think that's the key problem is like, so it's a little bit like if you I mean if you go back to this like web example, it's a bit like if you build a like mobile first website instead of a mobile app. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like kind of, you know, so like it's not as native to this new like back and forth. You pretty much just try to use the old tools and try to extend them into the new world, but it's just a totally different way of building it.
I see. I totally get the example, right?
Yeah.
The mobile app versus the mobile version on your phone, a mobile web app. I could totally see that. I want to get an idea of what it would be like to actually build it without.
Yeah.
Are you like pre-clustering them in some sort of way? I don't think that's it, right? Like how would it like? I'm trying to like put myself. I'm not a developer, so I'm more of a design UX product. So how would it work technically without having intents? Is it like what would you be programming?
Yeah, I mean, so you're really programming more the dialogue and like the actual outcome of the conversation instead of the inputs. So right now it's all about like the inputs, and that it's also, it's not that intents will entirely disappear, but they will become less important. I think, or we think over time, and so it's really also all about making sure that you don't have to like for every possible like data input. So you know right now in the current way of how these things are built, you would have to create like a data input intent or something like that if you would add like Thailand, right? And that doesn't make sense, because it doesn't make sense to like train an intent classifier on that. It just doesn't make sense. And so what we see is like kind of you design a dialogue, and then based on that, some parts might be an intent, others might not. And you can pretty much ignore this intent almost.
Interesting. So you would almost design the conversations first. For example, like we want to have a conversation about what it's like to lose your credit card, right? It could be anywhere. It doesn't matter if it's in Thailand or if it's in your bedroom, right? And so what does that conversation look like? You know, I lost my credit card might be like the first sentence. I can't find my credit card. You know, I need to order a new one. And those are just, 10 different examples. And then you're thinking about like, what are all the slots or all the different pieces of information you have to fill out in order to satisfy the ultimate.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I mean, and I mean, that's what Vittorio, for example, at Bot Society are providing, right? With the tool that they are building. And it's similar. I mean, like, as much as there are lots of differences between building web apps and conversational AI, there are also some similarities. And I mean, it's the same for a web app, right? If you build a web app or mobile app or whatever product, you also would, in a first phase, like discover use cases that people want, right? And so there are so many different ways of doing that. user research, maybe prototyping, like mock-ups, all of that, right? Once you learn more about that, you're probably going to design the mobile app or V1, and then you ship it, and then you have real people using it, and then you have analytics, which is another important piece of conversational AI as well, of course. And then you learn from that, and then you improve features, right? That's at least how I think most successful product teams work right now. And so that's very the same for conversational AI in many ways, right? Just that I think you want to get it out there even faster than this mobile app,
Yeah.
because you need this training data coming in.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing about bots is like you could literally have a POC ready within a week or two, and then you can start learning from it right away. And your customers are literally telling you what they want.
Yeah, exactly, definitely.
Yeah.
And that's I think the big power of it in the end, right?
Mhm.
And that's much better. I mean, even if an unhappy bot user told you what they wanted, that's much better than an unhappy website user that you never know about, right?
Exactly, exactly. And then you lose those website visitors. Like, what is it? 97% of your traffic won't buy from you, probably ever.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I mean, how many terrible digital products are out there and nobody is aware of it because nobody tells them?
Right. And that's a high cost, 97% of your traffic. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, and people always talk about like really high success rate for bots and how important that is. I don't think it's that important. I mean, I think it's important to continuously learn and improve.
Mhm.
But at the beginning, if you're like rolling it out to like a few hundred users or a few
Yeah.
thousand or however many you want, like I think it doesn't even matter if it has any successful conversation, right? I mean, of course, you ideally have a few, but it really doesn't matter because the ML systems get so much better over time. The more training data you have, you just have to get it out there.
Okay. And I think that's like really important thing for companies to know, because the definition of failure is a lot different than it is with apps.
Yeah.
I remember like the first few projects we did. Um, the client sees the bot, and you program it so it can answer those FAQ questions, and you have the way you would ask the questions and the way I would ask the questions. Then the real people come, and it's different, right? So every bot project has this like, uh, destiny with failure.
Yeah.
Very, very, very early on. And um, one of the people I really like in this space, he used to be in it, Shane Mack. He used to talk about that. Well, that's not a failure. That's your success, because you might think like, hey, our bot's not answering the questions right, or you can think of it as like, hey, for the first time, you're actually hearing what people are asking. And he would then take that, and they would iterate, and so every few weeks you're improving your bot. So I think they're a lot more like living systems almost. They're a lot more dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. They're really dynamic. But I think also like what we find is that bots are just inherently hard to test for test users. And the reason is that, so like if you give any bot to any human,
Yeah.
99% chance that they ask this bot if they want to get married or like some other stupid question, right? And so, and as much as this is like funny and
Right.
we're also joking about it,
Yeah.
in reality that doesn't happen, right? So if like rarely happens, and if you're in Thailand and you lost your credit card and you want a new one, you 100% won't ask the Bank of America chatbot to like pick Erica as an
Yeah.
example, and you probably wouldn't say, oh, do you want to get married?
Right. With my credit card.
And exactly, right? And so I think the point is also that you really want to make sure that you have the right test scenarios to actually really generate good training data that you can also leverage, right?
Right.
And I think that's what we find, and a lot of chatbot teams, I think, and voice teams overall find it's just hard to test them, because if you give them to a friend, they'll ask these questions because they can't put themselves into the scenario that the actual user would be in, and that makes it really hard also to compare.
Interesting. So how different is this than like testing other apps? Because typically, like, and I've done this with bot projects, but maybe you have more a different perspective on it. We would use like user testing or one of these other tools, and then we would give people like very specific tasks.
Yeah.
And the task isn't telling them what to do; it's just giving them a situation. Like you're in Thailand, you just lost your credit card, and you're talking to Erica, the Bank of America bot. And now you can decide like, the situations you lost your credit card. So we don't want to tell people like, hey, go tell Erica you lost your credit card, but what else are you going to do? Probably, right? And then you get to see how people talk to Erica. And then we ask him is like, hey, and then at the end of the survey, we would ask them like, what were you trying to accomplish, and were you successful or not? Is that missing something that is unique to bots that is no longer applicable, or is that just a good way to do it?
No, I think that's a pretty good way of doing it, actually. I think it's just not how most people test bots.
Interesting.
Okay. And I don't know why that is, but and I think it's also related to like if you go to, let's say you go to our website rasa.com now, you're probably able to like just give like a rating from like 0 to 10 how good of a website that is, or how it feels at least, right? And maybe like usability you might not think about in the beginning, but anyways, you can give some judgment, right? With a AI assistant, it's really hard to do that, because how would you judge it? I mean, it doesn't really show you anything, just a text box, or like not even a text box, voice, just like a microphone, and then of course the experience that you have with it will create a judgment around it, right? And if you don't have this like test case that you just described, you're probably going to ask a stupid question that nobody thought about, and then it'll be bad, right? And so,
right. Yeah, there's just like so many possibilities.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, I mean, you can, I think, at some point in time, handle a good amount of those. But I think at least from the experience of like Rasa developers in our open source community, that people don't ask these questions as often as you might think. So.
So Alex, over the last few years, the space has changed tremendously. And I'm starting to see some interesting changes in the last 6 months to a year. What are some of the ways that you're seeing the space change? Like what use cases are the best ROI, and which ones are kind of newer? Because we know, like, you go back to 2016, 17, like marketing was finally something that marketers were able to use to generate increased sales for bots, using it as a communication channel for upselling and all this sort of, e-commerce shopping stuff, automation wise. And then now it's with customer service. A lot of customer service departments are taking a lot of like back end systems, HR, et cetera, are taking on bots, RPAs that are making them conversational. It's all enterprise though, mostly, or small, big business, right? We're not, are you seeing any growth of use cases within enterprise? And are you seeing any growth of use cases like B2C or B2B or something else that is new or unique, where we would have never thought would happen, right?
Yeah. It's a hard question. It's like kind of, I mean, we are a horizontal developer framework, right? And so like we see everything from like hobby projects on a Raspberry Pi to like the largest banks in the world developing assistants for their end customers. And so I think what definitely hasn't happened is what a lot of people thought happened, which was like conversational commerce. I think that's something that we haven't seen yet in the wild. I don't know if you ever bought like shoes through a chatbot or something like that. I haven't. And I think it's something that a lot of people thought 4 years ago will happen. And I think the reason why it didn't happen is because these interfaces like I don't know, like mobile or like web shops are just pretty good. And so I think what we've seen though, fairly early on, and I think that just increased this year already, and I think it will increase despite COVID-19, even is like interfaces that have historically been terrible, like healthcare, banking, insurance, all of those, retail as well. And I think those are the ones that have seen the biggest benefits from conversational AI overall. But I do think that right now, it's mostly in big companies that really leverage it. And I think the reason is that you need a good enough training data set to get anywhere. And I think if you're just like a small cafe and you have maybe 10 conversations a week, it just doesn't make sense to automate those.
Right. It's funny because when this first started, we thought a lot of people in the bot community thought it would replace apps and it would be this, but it's just become the perfect enterprise software.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's basically like take all the legacy software that millennials and then the next generation behind us, I think Generation Z, they don't want to use old legacy software from like early 2000s and, logging into the HR app on their phone, which they never downloaded, right? And instead you can have this conversational app on top of it and you can just talk to it. And
yeah, internal cases definitely, but also like a lot of external cases. I think it really depends on the industry though. But yeah, I think overall, there's definitely also been like 2 waves of hype. Like the first one was the chatbot wave, and then a year later you had the voice wave. And I was just talking to a friend the other day, and he's more like he started during the voice wave, and
that's so interesting.
We both ran these meetup groups. So one is like chatbot meetup in Berlin, and the other one is the voice meetup in Berlin. And then at some point in time, like we noticed with the chatbot meetup that people just didn't show up, or like not many people showed up anymore as we used to. And then everyone went to the voice one, and then he was thinking, oh well, I'm like riding the great wave now. And so like fast forward to today, not many people come to either of those meetups, right? Which I think is just a good example of like how like hypes are drying down again. But in total, I think we like globally, especially in the Americas and EMEA, see like a lot of like use cases still in companies, like companies expanding into more use cases. And there's some real like significant progress happening. So I think if you take away the hype that happened, I think the industry is going in the right direction.
Yeah, I think in terms of like how the space evolves on the B2C side, I think the most logical thing is having like now expert knowledge bases you can ask questions to that'll take in the information and actually give you like a good response. You can think of it as like a virtual attorney or a virtual doctor. And I think we see it with like Giant is one example. There's a few other apps. One is a psychologist. And I've seen a few of these in like mostly the medical space that basically becoming like knowledge base as a service. And I think that's probably a byproduct.
I would say, right? I think on the enterprise side, we do see a lot of like consumer facing or like end customer facing use cases for sure, external ones.
Okay, you think that we're going to get a lot more knowledge bases in the next, I don't know, 24 months ish, where companies start creating knowledge bases because it's a better experience than having to search something on Google and hopefully you get the right article, hopefully you read to the end, and so on. Do you think that we're getting closer to that?
I mean, we integrated, or we built an integration with knowledge bases last year in our open source framework. And I mean, I think we see people using it, but I think the fact is more around like not only knowledge bases, but other systems that you already built before, right? So if you think about like maybe you have an existing Elasticsearch instance or something like that you've already built, I think a lot of big companies want to reuse that in conversational AI as well, which is one of the, I think, reasons why we've seen so much tremendous growth over the last like 2.5 years, is because companies want to customize those frameworks and assistants, right? And I think that's one example is a knowledge base, but lots of other examples.
Right. And so last 2 questions. One is, what do you think is the biggest challenge in the space? And if someone was coming into it, or let's say it was you coming into it, what would you tell yourself to focus on or do, or what problem would you say, hey, Alex, you're new to this, go solve this? What is maybe the biggest challenge enterprises are having? You already shared one of them, which I thought was great, and that's with the testing.
Yeah.
I've done that a couple of times now. What would be like your recommendation to either someone starting out or a company doing something for the first time?
A lot of people still today, and even like us at Rasa, I think when we first started working on this a couple of years ago, we thought that it's like a machine learning problem, and we thought like, you know, if you just build more cool technology and like making it easier to use, it'll solve all the problems, and allow people to build better conversational AI. We still think that's true, but we think it needs to be combined with like more education around workflows in enterprises. And that's to this point that I mentioned earlier, that it's just so different to build a machine learning based application than it used to be building like a mobile website or something like that. And so I think this like, it's almost like a behavior change in the way how they think about building software. A lot of people say like software 2.0, right? That's another buzzword that people throw around, which pretty much means like more data-driven a way to build software. And I think that's an important shift that has to happen. And I mean, the most forward-looking companies are already getting it, I think. I'm positive.
Got it. And last question, what is the future of bots in your opinion? How does this unfold over the next 6, 12 months and then the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, so I mentioned the 5 levels of AI assistance earlier, right? And so for us, level 5 is what we call an autonomous organization. And so the way how we look at it, it's pretty much like a network of different assistants that all work together to, you know, achieve something. And so that could be for an insurance company, maybe the onboarding process of a new person that signs up for the policy, but maybe also the claims process. And so they all work together and share that knowledge amongst them, right? And so that's the way how we look at this. But I think in the end, like another way to look at level 5 is also really that, and I think that's the more powerful idea behind this, is that all people, like whatever background they have, can use any piece of software that exists, right? And so you and I, for us, it's easy to use Zoom. For us, it's easy to book a flight on Expedia or some other place. But for a lot of people out there, it's actually pretty hard, right? And even for me, it's like hard to use some random government form for my local government to sign up for something, right? And so I think the point is like, if you can build a world where anyone can access any type of information, but at the same time also use software, we think this is extremely powerful and exciting, and that's what we're trying to do with Rasa.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting future. I think it's going to happen with, you know, sooner than we think, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it won't happen only this year. So it's definitely...
It's not going to be this year.
well, anyone who wants to join the space, ping me.
Yeah, it's a great time to join it right now. I think from what we've heard, a lot of companies are jumping into the space right now because 2 things are happening. One is their revenues are getting squashed, right? And on the other hand, their expenses are in proportion or skyrocketing, especially their customer service expense.
Yeah.
Right? People want to know if they're going to be able to get the stuff they ordered before, for example. And so we're seeing some more demand for customer service bots as we talk to people. But Alex, if the audience wants to follow up with you or follow you online, what's the best way to do that?
Just send me an email. It's alex@rasa.com.
Perfect.
So, yeah, easy to find.
All right. Well, thanks for watching, guys, and be sure to tune in on the next one. And we're going to do a Q&A session with Alex.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So I'm sure you guys are going to have a lot of questions. Maybe save them, please. Then you can come ask Alex yourself. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.